I don't believe the current generation is ready for the future workforce. There's been several studies that have said, digitalization in the industry is going to eliminate over 2 billion jobs and create, just over 1 billion.
Today's generation is definitely open and to many extents prepared for future of work. So I realized that I will need to work with robots, but then on the other hand, I lack the practical skills, so I don't know how it will work in the practice.
I won't want to use any device in my body to help me stay ahead of the game.
Yeah, I could see that I would augment myself and perhaps incorporate little artificial intelligence into my brains.
I think we're losing touch with who we are if we live in a world of augmentation based on, genetic modification, substances we're taking. We become different people, and that's a very scary thought.
And that's a very Orwellian introduction, really, isn't it, to the topic that we're going to be talking about this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you, and thank you very much for joining us. The next generation workforce. Over the next hour, with our three guests here on the panel, our job will be to come up with some recommendations for the next generation, and also for employers who have to cope with not just the next generation, but also the current generation as the current generation ages and becomes an aging workforce, when of course life expectancies are continuing to increase. So this is something of a readiness analysis. We're going to try and attack some of the main issues at hand, notably how to retain and create jobs, to cope with population growth, to reskill people, to try and match up skills with the jobs that are on offer. And I'm delighted to say that we're joined by three very significant individuals on this particular subject who all come from very different backgrounds, actually. So we can talk about this from various angles. Alain Dehaze, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Adecco Group, which is obviously a huge placement company, in fact the world's biggest placement company. We can talk about the skills gap and various of these issues with you. Also, we're joined by Dilip George, who is the co-founder and Chief Technology Officer of Vicarious Inc., which is an artificial intelligence company that is likely to be one of those that really is reshaping the jobs of the future, because essentially what you do is you help robots do other tasks than they traditionally were doing, so that they can become more flexible, and that means we'll see more automation in the workforce. And last but not least, Lawrence Wong, Minister for National Development and Second Minister of Finance for Singapore, and we can talk about how smart cities and the service industry in Singapore is helping to create jobs. Also this concept of how cities don't just need to create jobs, they need to keep people employed and keep them housed inside those cities, because urbanization is a huge part of the changes that we're seeing as well, with workforces wanting and needing to be near where their jobs are and want to be part of a community. But the problem is traditional cities mean that they get pushed out to the periphery when it comes to living. So let's start out first from you, Dilip. Explain to us what your company does, because every time everybody mentions artificial intelligence, all of us go a bit fuzzy.
Yeah.
At least I do.
Yeah. So if you take a step back, what AI is, it's the endeavor of making machines work like the human brain, right? And so that means everything that humans can do, machines will eventually be able to do. And we are already seeing signs of that. Alexa can recognize speech. Google can classify images. All those things which were impossible for computers earlier, now they can do. And similarly, robotics is the area that we are focused on currently. Our overall goal is to make intelligence go all the way to human level intelligence. Machine intelligence go all the way to human level intelligence. Right now, we are building an AI layer for robotics. Robotics, traditionally is a very, very repetitive task machine. A robot is a machine that can do, the same task repeatedly. Traditionally, these are applied in very structured environments. Auto manufacturing, where once a car is designed, the design remains stable for 5 years. So you can program the robots, take 2 years to program the robots, but the cost of that programming is amortized over 5 years. Whereas most of the manufacturing tasks are not like that. If you take a snapshot of a factory from 1900s and take a snapshot of a factory now, the assembly line looks exactly the same. It's a line of workers standing there doing the same repetitive task over and over again, which is picking up objects, putting them together, putting glue on it, putting a screw on it, finally putting it in a box and putting a sticker on it and shipping. And most of our products that we consume today are manufactured like this, including iPhones, high-tech things, or appliances. And why is robotics not applicable there today? Because robots cannot deal with the flexibility required, because humans can deal with variability. The same assembly line needs to manufacture different products at different times of the day. And bringing AI to robotics will make those tasks automatable. So you can now use robots to do these highly variable tasks, and that is what we are focused on.
How do you think your company in 20, 30 years' time will have changed the workforce? And how comfortable will you feel with that? Because obviously it's great that these are material benefits and advancements, but obviously people will have to be doing something else than those mechanical tasks that the robot will have picked up.
Yes. So this has happened already in the mechanical labor part, right? So you can think of construction. Used to be, so in fact, we just constructed a new office building near ours, and it doesn't take that many workers to construct a building now. A lot of the tasks are done by huge machinery, and you need just a few workers. It didn't used to be like that before, right? You needed a large number of people to come together to construct a building. And the same thing will happen in assembly line too. The number of people required to do this task will go down due to artificial intelligence. And on many ways, I feel good about one aspect of it, because many of these tasks are very, very repetitive. People don't enjoy doing those tasks, and that's, many of them are, companies have trouble retaining the people to do those jobs, because the humans actually don't want to do those jobs. They do it for making a paycheck and making a living, and for the community of it, going to the workforce and having. So it is inevitable that these jobs will get automated. AI will come and help automate that job, so that's definitely going to happen. And we, as a society, will have to figure out the ways on how to manage that change, how to do that transition.
And at the forefront of that change, Ana Duaz, is a company like Adecco. You place 1.7 million people every day, right, in jobs, and many different types of jobs. So you're really on the front line of this change. The kind of scenario that Dilip is explaining, how's that going to affect you? Are you already seeing this? Do you think companies are ready for this?
Yes. First of all, I would say that I'm an optimistic, and I'm also really excited by the opportunity that not only artificial intelligence, but all kind of technology will bring to the world in general, and the world of work in particular. And to explain that, I refer always to the revolution of the electricity. And artificial intelligence is a kind of revolution, a revival or a new revolution we had with electricity. And at the beginning with electricity, we had one or two applications. And we have seen electricity going in all kind of new products or of new developments, creating new industries that we didn't have before electricity. And I think with artificial intelligence, it will be exactly the same. You have some dangers, or you will have some consequences. Some jobs will disappear because they will be replaced by robotics in combination with artificial intelligence. But a lot of new industries, a lot of new jobs will be created thanks to this technology and other technology. And for us, the challenge is more about the synchronization between the creation of new jobs, new industries, and destruction of jobs because of this new revolution. And so that's why we argue that governments, companies, especially regulators, are working together to make this a very good synchronized event. That's point one. Second, the second challenge is all about the reskilling, because due to these new technologies, yeah, you see, according to the last McKinsey study, that around 370 million people in the world will have to be upskilled, reskilled. And again, it is about how do we do that? And again, we need a kind of tripartite agreement between regulators, between the companies, between the people, on how they can move to these new skills which are absolutely needed for the companies.
How far away are we from that tripartite agreement you often refer to?
I think we are at the very, very, very beginning, because we see that today it's difficult for companies to anticipate this change. It is difficult for governments to also to anticipate and structure and support, coach this change in the society. And I think there is a urgent need to talk to each other and have and work on this anticipation of change in the labor force.
Mr. Lawrence Wong, in Singapore, you're kind of ahead of the curve on this. And you've been forward planning for some time, haven't you? That's in terms of your sort of urban development, your economy, the types of jobs that are on offer. Do you agree with some of the comments that Monsieur Duaz and also Dilip were making before about, you know, how we're only at the start of this process and we might have moved out of denial, but we still don't know what's coming?
Well, Nina, Dilip talked about many jobs being lost. Alain said he's an optimist. I think I'm a realist.
Good.
We know that technological change has brought about disruptions all throughout human history, but we think that this new wave of automation will bring about much more upheavals. In the long run, I believe more jobs will be created. But, you know, as Keynes said, in the long run, we are all dead. So what comfort is it to people when you tell them that in the long run, there are more jobs? I think the transition will be unsettling. There will be significant disruptions. So I do agree with Alain that we have to do more. And the responses that we have been thinking about in Singapore, I would sketch out perhaps 3 broad areas. Firstly, a major investment in adult skills training. We often talk about this, but a lot more still needs to be done. At different levels, at the individual level, it's about embracing a mindset of lifelong learning, supporting individuals, supporting workers. I had attended a conference in Singapore recently, and the tagline was, "Never graduate." And I think that's a good tagline to have. It captures the spirit of what we want to do. Never graduate, always improve and learn. There is some sense that this is catching on because workers are starting to feel anxious. They want to upgrade, but they often say, I don't know what courses to take. I don't know what I should do to improve myself to be relevant for the future. So I do believe employers need to play a part, and I fully agree with the comments earlier that we need a tripartite approach. Government, employers, and workers, and unions coming together. So that's the approach we've taken in Singapore, with a tripartite approach, bringing the different stakeholders. We've rolled out something called industry transformation maps. Sector by sector, we engage corporate leaders, union leaders, and workers, and get them to identify in this company, in this industry, how will technology impact your business? What is the response you have to make? But a very important point is then to get the companies to translate their strategies into skill sets. Then the government can work with companies like Adecco, with training providers, with the companies themselves to develop training programs. And then these can be supported by the government, and workers can take on these training programs to stay competitive. A second area is really to then, besides industry-specific skills, to think about what are the areas where humans can continue to have a competitive advantage over machines. Because we can't beat the machine by being a better computer. It's not possible. So what is it that humans can do better than computers? And I think the answer to this question lies in the abilities that define us as human beings. It's the ability to empathize with one another, to build relationships, to interact in groups, to have serendipitous interactions, brainstorming that leads to more creative solutions. These are things that humans can do, which machines still can't do. Maybe at some point when Dilip invents something,
I disagree.
machines will surpass human capabilities even in these areas, but I think in the foreseeable future, humans still hold a significant advantage, and we should build on these strengths. And it may sound like it's stating the obvious, but I think it's not to be taken for granted that these are things that humans can continue to do well. Because if you look around us, people are interacting less than before. You see families, having a meal at the same table, but often dining alone, but each one is glued to their handphone. And the trends do not bode well when you look at the younger generation, because survey after survey suggests that young people are socializing less.
Yeah.
One survey in America suggested that the post-millennial generation, and that's not even talking about millennials, post-millennial, born after 95, on a typical post-millennial teenager is spending 1 hour less a day meeting a friend in person compared to their counterpart from the earlier cohort, a Gen X or a millennial. 1 hour does not sound like very much, but when you add it up over many days, many years, it means that much less time building social skills and learning how to navigate through emotions and interactions with people. So these are things all of us, I think, will have to think very hard about when it comes to how we can develop human skills.
Now let's just pause for a minute, because I want to see whether we can actually bring up a live voting questions to inform what our audience thinks about this particular subject. And here's the question: what is the most likely outcome of automation for the global workforce by 2030? Is it robots and AI replacing more than 50% of human jobs? Is it, as you can see there, the creation of new jobs so displaced workers may find dignified work yet again? Robots and AI increasing productivity and hence growth in advanced economies, and income polarization between advanced and developing economies. So can I just ask our audience, please, join in the debate and vote on that. What do you think? And to our panelists, what do you think? Dilip, do you think that robots and AI will replace more than 50% of human jobs? I mean, you're really at the forefront of what AI can do.
If you divide it by some sectors, so the overall jobs could increase, and so it might not be 50% of the available jobs at that time. But if you consider by sector, if it is manufacturing or some assembly line work, driving, you could argue that some portions of could be 50% or 100% automated.
Yeah. Out of all of those issues, what would you pick? Do you think that presumably robots and AI will increase productivity, and hence, help people's lives? Presumably, that's your answer. But as Lawrence Wong was just pointing out, the problem is people need human skill sets, and if they're interacting with robots and AI more and more and more, they're going to start losing their competitive advantage over robots, aren't they? Essentially.
And I would also add that while in an area like driving, automated vehicles may come about, but there are considerable public policy issues, liability issues that still need to be resolved.
Sure.
So there will be areas where machines can do some tasks well, but I'm not sure that humans will be entirely comfortable in letting machines control everything. So I'm not sure that the pace of automation will truly advance at that level that we are thinking about, even if technology allows it.
Oh, so you're saying that politicians are going to block it?
Well, I think politicians will respond to human concerns, and I would imagine that there will be significant and considerable human concerns about ethical issues, about making judgments on or decisions, letting machines do that, as opposed to letting humans make those considered and deliberate decisions, even if machines are that capable.
Go ahead.
No, I would like, perhaps, that's why also I'm optimistic. I think big change are taking time. And let's not forget that we had already the internet bubble in 2000. It was 18 years ago, and we are still working on this. Now, why do I say this? Because we are heavily involved, for example, in driverless car development and program. And I discussed with our customer and saying, okay, when will we have driverless car everywhere in the world? If you talk really to the specialists, they are saying, first of all, we are developing in the US. We will try to cover different cities in the US. But don't expect very fast a driverless car in Zurich, which will have to cope with the snow, with some difficult architecture, urban architecture. So I think, yes, technology will move us ahead. I think in the questions, yeah, there will be a lot of disruption, new sectors and so on, but it will take time. It will take time like electricity has taken time. At the beginning, there was also companies saying, no, that we have electricity, we can work night and days. And then the regulators came and said, oh, perhaps we should work maximum 8 to 10 hours per day. And with technology, it will be the same. There will be progress from the technology itself, and it will take time. And on the other side, we will need regulators to how to cope with this new technology.
And regulators reflect public appetite for these changes, right? Essentially, it's not just that the politicians are blocking things, it reflects public sentiment vis-à-vis these changes. Let's see whether we can just have a look at the results and see what the audience thinks about the question at hand. So again, just a reminder, what's the most likely outcome of automation? And as you can see, robots and AI increasing productivity and hence growth in advanced economies. But I have to say, income polarization between advanced and developing economies was also up there. And we've got quite a split in the audience in terms of sort of what they think. It's not quite as stark as you'd have thought. What is comforting is that a lot of you out there think that robots and AI replacing more than 50% of human jobs is not that likely a scenario. But that could, as you pointed out, Dilip, reflect what sectors you work in.
And I would also add, Nina, that to the point about regulators and the role that policymakers have in adoption of technology, I don't want to make it sound as though, to this point, that politicians or regulators are out there to want to block technology from taking place. But it is a progressive approach where you want to allow, get people to be comfortable, and then progressively let change happen. Because change management requires a lot of effort. Absolutely. It's not immediate. So some of the things we've done in Singapore, for example, is to have a sandbox. You want to try something new, the regulators allow a sandbox, a pilot where the rules are lifted. Within this confined space, you can try AVs, you can try autonomous vehicles, you can try new technologies, but you can try a microgrid. But when the microgrid fails, there won't be a blackout for the whole of Singapore. So that's the kind of approach that we have in thinking about enabling technology on the one hand, while at the same time managing the pace of change.
Which is similar to the driverless car cities in America where they're allowing that type of technology.
Yeah, but I don't think that it will be regulation that is going to hold back these technologies. It is really technology readiness that is holding back driverless cars. If driverless, at the point where driverless cars are better than human, and individual, paying attention human, and can be, drive anywhere like in snow or, on Indian streets. Regulators are not going to be able to, because it is at that point the argument would be, why would you make people drive, right? So it is really the technology readiness that is going to, it's not the regulators slowing down things. That I don't think that is the reality.
Let's move away from technology just for a moment to talk about the future workforce's attitude towards their jobs, because that's also changing. And as we've spoken about this before, millennials and their attitude, and post-millennials, as Lawrence Wong, you mentioned before, they have very different attitudes towards their jobs, don't they? And you're right at the forefront of this changing trend. How is that going to impact the workforce of tomorrow? Because people's expectations from a job are completely different.
Absolutely. It is already impacting the current labor force. It is already impacting the hiring strategy of companies, because the new generations is mainly purpose-driven. So they are looking for work with a strong purpose. And if the companies is not able to, let's say, to have this purpose-driven work for them, yeah, these millennials or this Gen Z and the next generation will not be attracted by these companies. It's not only about attraction, but it is also about retention, because we see that, for example, young Americans between 18 and 25 are changing on average 11 times from jobs, 11 times in 7 years. And why? Because they are moving from one project to the others, because they are looking for purpose. And if they don't find a purpose-driven work in one company, once their project is finished, they go to the next one. And this is also the reason behind the so-called gig economy, because 47%, for example, of the young graduates, new graduates in the US, is joining the labor force as a freelancer. And this has major impact. It's already today 30% of the workforce in the US is freelance. It will move up to 50% by 2025. And again, it means a lot for companies on how to get to these millennials. That's why, for example, we have co-created with Microsoft a platform for these freelancers, allowing companies to put their needs on a platform, and these freelancers to go to the platforms and find the job they want to do. This platform is called YOS, Your Own Boss, or your one-stop shopping, because this is the future of work.
Now, obviously, I recognise you're in a unique position because you run what is effectively the world's biggest recruitment and placement agency. So the idea of churn, you know, is omnipresent when you're dealing with 1.7 million people you're helping to find work every day. But not everybody chooses to be their own boss. And even when we talk about the concept of AI affecting our lives in the future, as Lawrence Wong, you mentioned, it's also a question of personal choice, whether or not we allow this to happen. So with the idea of sort of the so-called gig economy, we have to distinguish, don't we, between people who are in these kind of jobs by circumstance because they don't have a choice, and in these kind of jobs because they do actually want to be in those type of jobs. Based on your findings at Adecco, what's the proportion around the world of people who are in the gig economy because they're forced to be?
Let's say that 24%, around 24-25% of our, let's say, associates being in the temporary staffing or freelancers have taken that kind of flexible framework as a real way of professional life. They want to choose the work they want to do. They want some freedom to take eventually holidays when they want to take holidays, the freedom. And then you have another part around also, it's difficult to put percentage, but also that kind of flexible work is a way to find permanent work. So I take the example of France. In France, we have every day 140,000 people working in an Adecco contract. 40% of them will find a permanent job after, on average, 24 months of work with us.
But France's, forgive me, France's labour regulations also have sort of selected for a situation where temporary contracts, people are in temporary contracts for a long time. Some other European countries
That's
have
the
that
perception everybody has, but I can tell you that the market penetration of temporary staffing in France is at the same level that the market penetration in the US or even in UK. So labor regulation doesn't explain this, let's say, this market penetration. It's really, I think what is explaining this is what we call the VUCA word. So companies, especially companies, are living, developing in a volatile, unpredictable, complex, and ambiguous world due to technology, due to a lot of phenomena. And so to cope with this changing world, you need more and more flexibility in your model, in your organization model. So that's why we see our biggest global customers have at least 40% flexibility in their organization model, just to cope with all these changes.
Can I
Lawrence
just
Wong,
add
yes.
something to perhaps complement what was said earlier? we have been tracking statistics exactly on those issues in Singapore, on the proportion of people who are defined as freelancers or self-employed. In Singapore, it's about 8 to 10% of the workforce. Then to Nina's point, what proportion of them are doing it voluntarily as a way of life, as opposed to those who are forced by circumstance? And we found that about 4 in 5 are voluntarily doing this. It sounds quite high, but these are not all so-called gig economy jobs. Many of them are still traditional jobs. Taxi drivers, well, now Uber and Grab, has modernized your traditional taxi drivers, but you have taxi drivers, you have insurance agents. So these are traditionally known as contractors, and they are self-employed. And it's still 4 in 5, and they are voluntarily doing it because they feel like they want flexibility in their way of life. 1 in 5 are those who involuntarily get into this. They would prefer to have a permanent job, but they can't find a permanent job. But that 1 in 5 is growing, and therefore we think that the pressures will continue to grow. Across the whole group, when we survey them, the common concerns that self-employed and freelancers have are, number 1, payment disputes, frequently with their clients, and therefore concerned about getting their income. Number 2, loss of job in case of illness, loss of income in case of illness. And number 3, adequacy of retirement and medical savings.
Absolutely.
So those are issues that we are thinking about. How can we support them better?
And what do you think the answer is, and how comfortable do you feel as somebody here who's from the government side, picking up the tab for when people decide to become their own boss, but as a result they don't have all the kind of infrastructure for later on in their life, when an aging workforce, that otherwise traditional jobs would give them, which wouldn't necessarily be something you would have to worry about so much?
So it doesn't always have to be a government solution. For example, if there are payment disputes, then we, again, through a tripartite approach, can put in place standards for customers, for clients, to resolve some of these issues. When it comes to loss of income due to illness, we can have risk pooling solutions through insurance, which we are thinking about. So these are potential policy responses that can provide a stronger support infrastructure for freelancers and self-employed persons.
I can give our experience because we have, for these reasons, we have developed this platform, YOS platform, because on one hand, we had our customers saying, hey, we need, especially the big corporation, we need to find these competencies, we need to access them, but we don't know how to access them, these new graduates on one hand. And on the other hand, we had these freelancers saying, yeah, I love to do my job, I love to do design, I love to do IT programmation, and so on and so on. But I don't know how to find customers. I don't know how I have to cope with all my social administration burden. What kind of social tax do I have to pay for my pension, and so on. And third, payments. Huge problem for these freelancers to be paid. So that's why we said, okay, let's do this platform. And in this platform, we will find a customer for you. We will make sure, because it's our knowledge, we know the labor market in 60 countries. We take care of all the social administration, make sure that you have the right contract, because yes, in France, freelancers can have potentially 30 different type of contracts, but we will indicate the right one. We will make sure we will offer the benefits. So we have partnered, you can take the benefits, we organize. And third, we pay you after 72 hours after completion of the mission. So this is a way how we progress. But one of the key points, and again, tripartite, we need to discuss, not only to discuss, but we need to regulate this new kind of labor market, because in a lot of countries, there is no regulation.
Dilip, this is where I'm coming to you. Regulation for, AI and forward technology. Actually, the solution that you're talking about, Mr. Diaz, is, of course, it's a technological solution, isn't it? So absolutely. That's the irony. So technology, of course, is helping us in this scenario. Yeah. Fan, do you think we'll get to a point where, robots need to be regulated?
Yeah, I mean, regulation has always a part in the society, because you want to make sure that companies are not externalizing many of the costs. So you have to make sure that it's a fair playground. Regulation can create environments that support entrepreneurship. And I think regulation can also take care of people who are displaced. I am really concerned about, how do you manage the transition of people who has been working on assembly lines or has been driving trucks for, let's say, 20, 30 years, and they have mortgages to pay. They have they have to send children to school, college, and suddenly their job is gone, and that's the only thing they knew how to do. Their community was built on that. Whole cities were built on such jobs. How do you manage that transition? And governments have a big role to play in managing that transition. And let's not pretend that this hasn't happened. This has already happened, right? This multiple cycles of this has happened. Detroit went through, a period of, losing jobs and city kind of downsizing. And what the kind of things that we have to worry about are, what is the pace of that change? Do people have to do this multiple times? You learn a new skill and that becomes obsolete after 2 years. And what is the stress associated with it? Can you do that while you have to worry about putting food on the table and making the mortgage paycheck? Can you afford to go to school and reskill while having all this stress on yourself? These are the kind of things that we have to worry about, and those are the places I think government can play a big role.
Let's open the floor up for questions. I'm sure that this is a hot topic for many of you. We can see a question right at the back there, to the gentleman.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Doga from Japan. I run an online education company in East Asia. We provide vocational training and also basic education to about 3 million people in Asia. So I have a question to Alan. You talked about reskilling and recurrent education. So out of those 3 billion workforce we have in the world, what does your company actually do in order to reskill people? Because I'm sure the demand for the jobs have been changing. So we now need more mechanical engineers, deep learning engineers, but the people who go and search on your website don't really have the skill. From the Adecco's point of view, are you actually doing anything? Or, I just want to hear some specific solution. BTW, my company, is acquired by Japan's Recruited. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for your question. Because it gives me a wonderful opportunity, you will hear in a minute. Now, so everybody knows Adecco, but we have 8 different global brands, and one of our brands, or the brands, which is Lee Hecht Harrison, it's not so well known from the public, but we are the #1 worldwide in the haute placement. So last year, we helped 350,000 people to find another job, eventually in the same industry or in another industry, but because their employer was restructuring, changing technology and so on. And so we are helping these people and the employees of our customers in 50 countries. And one of the signals we got because of this increasing skills imbalances, and I can put figures, people today are losing 30% of their competencies after a period of 4 years. 4 years, 30% of your competencies are gone. And so we heard from our customers, okay, it's a little bit a pity because on one hand, we have to restructure because we don't have the right competencies. And on the other hand, we have to hire people with new competencies.
Which is expensive.
So it is expensive, it is socially disruptive. Why don't we find a solution to reskill and upskill people, at least part of it? And exactly for that reason, we have announced 2 or 3 weeks ago the acquisition of a company called General Assembly in New York. And General Assembly is the leader, the global leader today in the upskilling and reskilling in digital competencies. And this company is already active in 6 countries, have 20 global campuses, can provide this upskilling and reskilling in coding, data science, all kind of marketing, but everything linked to new technology, in either in classrooms, in hybrid, or really online. Because we want to really present to our offer, but also the government and regulators, the help to accompany this transition that will take place in the years to come.
And is it working already? Do you think you're getting any evidence that this type of strategy is working?
Yeah,
Being
it is
embraced?
absolutely working. It will become operational effective after the authorization of the US, let's say, US regulator. But we have announced this acquisition, and I was really, I was sure from these skills and balances, but we got a lot of positive signals from really global companies, CEOs, CHRO, saying this is the top of my priority.
Because it takes it off of the CEO's mind. Yes. Then they know that they can outsource that as a.
What do you do with your thousands of people who you know will be replaced by robots? How do you know? What do you do with these people? How do you reskill these people to cope with the new technology you have to put in place in your companies? It's a huge topic.
Let's take another question from the audience. Ah, there we go. Lady in the front, thanks.
Hello, my name is Yukari. I have a question for Mr. Wong. It's about education, so not like national development, but as far as I know, the Singaporean education is a kind of escalator system. So you have to take an examination at some point, and then you will be qualified to go to the university, or you will go to specific schools, and so forth. But considering the fact that our generation is more like a reskilling, and we have to update our knowledge and everything. Don't you think that is important to give an opportunity for people who's not qualified at that point? Or do you think what kind of changes should be made in the education in Singapore? Thank you.
Thank you. I do think we have a good education system. If you look at the way our kids are educated and you look at how they perform relative to other students through the OECD measures, they do very well. So it's not just simply a matter of exams and doing well in exams, but even in unstructured tests, they do well. But what you are alluding to, I think, is a sense of emphasis on credentialism and emphasis on paper qualifications as a measure of success and progression in one's life. It's not an education problem per se, but it's a societal mindset. It's a parental mindset as well. And that's what we are trying to shift. It's not unique to Singapore by any means. It's not unique to Singapore. Perhaps less so in Europe, I don't know, but certainly if you look at Asian countries, there is that emphasis on credentialism as a signal for employers to decide who is the better candidate, as a signal to society to decide whether or not you can do well in life. So we should move away from that. How? I think the emphasis needs to be on skills. Yes, yeah. The emphasis needs to be on performance. The emphasis needs to be on what one can bring and contribute to society. You know, your paper qualifications do not define who you are as a person. So this is a big mindset change that we are trying to effect in Singapore.
And people like Mark Zuckerberg would attest to that, wouldn't they?
Absolutely.
Because at the end of the day, the piece of paper wasn't important.
Although he was in Harvard.
He was, but he dropped out.
Yes, I know.
He didn't get the full piece of paper.
Now, what I would like to add, because indeed education is one of the key stakeholders, and we didn't discuss a lot about education till now, and it is key. And it is a huge challenge for the education system. Because on one hand, you see technology going faster and faster and faster, and how can the education system prepare the people of in 5, in 10, in 15 years when you don't know what the technology will be in 3 years from now and what will be the change. So, and that's where also I think that this tripartite should include the education system at all levels. And That's why I'm also a strong believer of the Swiss and the German vocational training system, the apprenticeship, because it allows all the stakeholders to align permanently the business needs, the education system, and the regulators. And we see that the countries having put in place that kind of platform, alignment platform, are the one with the lowest, not only unemployment, but also lowest youth unemployment, which is one of the terrible facts in this world.
But it's a cultural shift. It's a massive cultural
It
shift,
is.
especially here in Europe, from one country to the next. On the other side of the border, you know, Germany might have, as you pointed out, one attitude towards vocational training. France has a completely different attitude, where it's, you know, people are trained far more for academic theory and perhaps less practice. How long will it change to get this cultural shift in place, and how acute is the skills gap that you're hearing in all these different countries?
I think especially right now, now that all the economies, it's not only a European issue. You have the same issue in the US. In the US, you have almost 10% youth unemployment. And you have scarcity. Because on one hand, you have quite high youth unemployment, but on the other hand, employers are saying, we don't find people, we don't find the right people. And I'm convinced that this apprenticeship model, the pure one being the Swiss and the German, is for sure the best one, but you start young, 15, 16 years old. But you see, for example, that the US is also accelerating apprenticeship. It was under the Obama legislation, but it is also under the Trump legislation. At least they are continuing. And you see, for example, that the average age of an apprentice in the US is 29 years old. So you can also become, again, an apprentice, even if you are older, because it allows the business to find the right competences.
Yeah.
So it's also, can I add one? I think it will be very hard for governments to plan what skills to teach. It's you know, how, you know, look at the kind of jobs that we have now compared to jobs we had 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You know, my son grows up with role models on YouTube. You know, there is a genuine job which is playing games on YouTube and kids watching them, and this is a job that generates money, and you know, there is an audience for it. And can you plan for that? It's not, you know. So I think you can. What you can do is generate an environment where people have a motivation to learn and take risks and do entrepreneurship, and that's really all government can do. You cannot do top-down planning on this is the skills to teach. You know,
and AI plays a huge role in education, doesn't it, as you pointed out?
But precisely to Dilip's point, I think that when you talk about education, it's not just about the content.
Yeah.
It's about the values.
Right.
And a lot of these values that you talk about, that intellectual curiosity, that desire to want to learn, grit, resilience, the ability for delayed gratification, as opposed to wanting everything instant now because we are living in an age of instant.
Yeah.
All these are important values to instill, more so than content, because content can change.
Change.
Let's take another question. There was a lady there. Let's take these two questions, actually, first, and then we'll take you, just in case they're related. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Yuri, and I'm involved in the liberal arts summer school in Japan. And then I think, like, of course, like it's really important to focus skill-based education. But at the same time, I think like liberal arts is still really important. And then I really would like to ask that the role of liberal arts, the importance of liberal arts, will be changing in the era of the labor market will be more like freelancers or skill-based. Thank you.
Okay, and then Yuso as well. We'll take your question, thanks. Yes, please go ahead. Oh, did the mic? Excuse me. Could we have the microphone back? Thanks. Just for this gentleman here in the front.
Hi, I'm Thomas. I'm from Germany, and going back to the discussion on labor mobility, one of the discussions we had yesterday also in the Wings of Excellence pitches by the students was labor mobility. And having lived in, that's a question to Mr. Wong actually, having lived in Singapore myself before and having obtained an employment pass, I was lucky enough to get an employment pass. I know it's a big discussion in Singapore, right? The ratio on employment passes and also depends a little bit on the industries. So my question would be, with AI around the corner and all these discussions on labor replacement, what is your take on these ratios? Are you going to be even more distinguishing between the different industries, or are you going to not? Are you not planning on changing anything there? So I'd be interested to hear on what you think there.
Let's start out with your question to Mr. Wong.
Oh, okay.
And then we'll take yours, Yuri, afterwards.
Well, so on both points, the first one on the importance of liberal arts, as I mentioned earlier, I do think that human skills becomes important in the age of machines. So all the more, humanities, liberal arts education will continue to play an important role. You need to combine technical know-how, the ability to understand machines, with that ability to interact with humans. And that's why there's still a role in liberal arts even when we emphasize STEM. On Singapore's population, labor force, it will continue to evolve. Our primary emphasis is that we stay open as a society. And that doesn't change. However, our ratios change and evolve. Our fundamental direction is to stay open and to remain that cosmopolitan society even while we provide a home for Singaporeans. This also relates to, I think, a very important point which we have not talked about in terms of how we design our workplaces, our living environments, and even the way we design our cities. Because we sometimes think of cities as hardware and infrastructure. But cities are, another way to think of cities is that they are a form of social reactor. They are an agglomeration of human connections. And in a world where you want humans to thrive, you want well-designed cities that can maximize these social interactions and human connections, be it amongst professionals who come from abroad or locals who are working within the country. You want to maximize those social interactions. If you have a poorly designed city, then the workplace is alienating, it's isolating, it's stressful. Life will be miserable, especially if there are robots all around you. But if you have a well-designed city...
Mind you, you have robotic trees in Singapore, don't you? You have
just a few.
With robotic
just
trees.
a few.
Even the trees are robots.
Just a few. But very many authentic trees. In fact,
CNN did a whole program on your robotic trees.
Little known fact, in the center part of Singapore, there is a nature reserve, and there are more tree varieties in that little part of Singapore than there is in the entire North American continent.
Wow.
Oh.
Very good.
So we think that environment matters, right? You don't have to build an urban concrete jungle that makes life miserable. You can create a garden city that is a city in a garden, a city in nature, a city that enables the human spirit to thrive. And that's, I think, what will give us the best chance of success.
Yeah. Let's take another couple more questions from the audience. Gentleman over there, and then a gentleman there in the middle. And I'll take a couple from this side of the room before we wrap up.
Good morning. I'm from Argentina, South America, and I'm the Secretary of Youth Affairs of the country. So what I want to say is that when things go bad, it's because politicians. But when things goes in a good way, it's because entrepreneurs, NGOs, and companies. And that's not true. I'm very proud to be a politician, and I'm very proud to work in the government. So what I want to say is that sometimes we think that politicians have to solve everything, and the government is responsible for everything. And the world has changed. In many countries, a CEO is more important than a president. And in Argentina, we have a big problem. 50% of high school students drop out of high school. So they will never get a degree, they will never go to the university, so it's going to be very difficult to get a job. And we have a more complicated situation due to this situation, narco-traffic. Narco-traffic offers to those young people $200 per week if they are soldiers of them. So my question is for you, how companies can help us with those young people will never be back to high school, will never are going to get a degree. They don't know what AI means, but we are going to let them there. So how CEOs, entrepreneurs, NGOs can help us with those students, known students?
Thank you very much for your question. Let's take another question in the audience. I'll ask you, Alain, to reply to that in a second's time, but I'll just see whether... So we had a gentleman here, thank you, with your hand raised.
Thank you. I'm Heinz Pöttinger from Austria, Pöttinger Core Holding. You have talked about platforms, how people have the possibility to learn the skills. What interests me is how the young people or the people who are getting upskilled or reskilled, how you motivate them, how you actually break this gap or these obstacles that IE or digital communication becomes normal or not so difficult as we see it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Heinz. So first of all, Doaz, if you could answer that question from Argentina. It's interesting because last night when we did the session with Mona Moshed of Generation, again, somebody else in the audience raised the question of a job being an identity. And it's not just an identity, obviously, it's a means of livelihood, and people will find other livelihoods because they need to pay the bills, especially if they've been shut out of the education system. But it's this idea of jobs. People need to find some way to sustain themselves, but they also will feel alienated if they've been shut out of the workforce. How can companies like yours start to smash that taboo of undereducation and get them back into the workforce?
I love your country first. Argentina is a wonderful country. And I'm also very happy because I'm near my job as CEO of the ADECO Group. I'm also the chairman of the Global Apprenticeship Network. And Argentina, I was there 18 months ago, and we signed the local chapter for the Global Apprenticeship Network in Argentina. Why do I say this? Because in Latin America, 60% of the young people are entering the labor force or the labor market in an informal way. And I think this is the big challenge, not only of Argentina, but it is a big challenge of Latin America. Now, how can we solve this? We especially we are involved in this labor force ecosystem, but we cannot solve this without partnering, and that's why I say partnering, having this dialogue together with the regulators, and together think how can we make sure that these young people are entering the labor market with the right legal framework, because all these young people entering in the labor market with informality have no social coverage, are not preparing pension and so on. So my answer to you is, first, work is, since more than 2,000 years, the best social integrators. And especially in countries in Latin America and so on, we should make sure that we create work. You have work. Then, second, through a dialogue, a platform dialogue between education, companies, and regulators, we find a way to enter all this young generation in a proper way in the labor market. It's not about them and us. No, we have to do it together through a platform. This is on your question. Now, on the second questions, we are, especially with General Assembly, you will see, we are coming into new models where learning will be free of charge. It's called talent as a pipeline. So young people will be able to follow training free of charge according to the program, 3 months, 6 months, but they will commit themselves to somehow pay back this training when they will get work after this training. So that kind of new model will also happen or will develop in the society, so that you will not be dependent from, let's say, your income to reskill and upskill yourself. The system, and hopefully tomorrow also helped by the regulators, the society will be able to help you to do that, let's say, in an easy way.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we've finished for the moment because we've run out of time, and in fact, indeed gone over by about 4 minutes, and I'm conscious that the next session is about to begin. I'd like to urge you to continue this conversation, perhaps with our panelists, during the coffee breaks. I can see there were a lot more hands raised to ask questions than I was able to get to, unfortunately, and this is a broader topic, which also encompasses other things that we haven't discussed on the stage, but I would like to thank our guests today for their insightful views. Dilip George, as I was saying before, co-founder and chief technology officer of Vicarious Inc. Also Anna Duaz from Adecco Group, and Lawrence Wong from Singapore. We thank you very much for your time and your views today.